Hey 302, I'm Jackie Ferris. We are back at one of our favorite places, Winterthur. Now you've heard about the gentleman who lived here. Well, today we're going to tell you about the lady of the house. Stay tuned, the 302 is headed your way. Hey 302, we are here at Winterthur. You often hear a lot about H.F. DuPont, but there was a lady of the house and we're going to learn all about her. We're joined now by Deborah Harper and we're going to be talking about Ruth Wales DuPont. Deborah, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for coming to see us.
So Ruth Wales DuPont early beginnings weren't in Delaware, but in New York. Tell me about her life as a child.
Correct. She grew up in Hyde Park in New York, adjacent to the Vanderbilt property there. Her parents were well connected, but not financially secure. So she grew up largely benefacted by some of her family relations. She was privately educated at Miss Spence's school in New York. She studied piano from the time she was a very young child and became a very accomplished pianist. So she had largely an upbringing that you would expect for a woman coming of age in the 19-teens, that she was geared towards a very social existence. She attended a lot of parties, coming out, debutantes, all that sort of thing. And she met H.F. DuPont because both her father and his father were active in politics in Washington, D.C. So they met in D.C., but they also met on the summer social circuit as well. We're not sure exactly where they met. Was it D.C. or was it on the social circuit? It could have been either one. But she certainly knew H.F. DuPont for at least 4 years before she married him, because her first visit that we know of to Winterthur was in 1912 when she was invited here as one guest of many at an entertainment.
Now you mentioned her early education. I understand that she studied literature or writing.
Well, yes, writing was hugely important for ladies of her time period. It was the primary mode of communication, much the way we are constantly texting today. People at that time were constantly writing letters. And it's because of all the letters that we have in our archives that Ruth wrote that we're really able to reconstruct aspects of her life and her personality that otherwise, quite frankly, would be lost to us. She wrote many letters to her mother. She wrote to friends. She wrote to her daughters when they were away at school. She wrote to H.F. If he was here at Winterthur because he was doing some business in Wilmington and she was out at the summer house at Southampton, she would be writing to him about her experiences there. So all of those give us a sense of what her life was like. And you really get a great glimpse of her personality. And interestingly, some of the similarities across time between her life and the life that women lead today. She was, of course, after she married, the primary caretaker of the children. And we have letters that she wrote to her daughter's school because she had to take her daughter to the orthodontist. And she writes the letter and says, "Now, I know the headmistress is not going to approve, but what can I do? This is when the orthodontist has hours and I'm taking her out of school." It's the same thing I went through with my girls. So you get that kind of connection because of these letters that survived, and she was brought up to do that with her early education. She was taught penmanship, she was taught the correct form of letters and invitations, and we have copies of those and her teachers' remarks on them about where she needed to improve or what she was doing well. That was an integral part of her education.
Now you're able to see a part of her personality through her writing, but in person she was very charismatic and very outgoing, kind of the opposite of her husband.
Yes, I think they were an interesting pairing because he was known for having a very dry wit, but being a rather quiet person. I don't think anybody would call him effusive. Ruth, on the other hand, was brought up to be very social. And she was very gracious, and people remembered her that way. They remembered her kindness, they remembered her integrity, and they remembered just what a warm welcome she provided for everyone who crossed paths with her. So I think they were a complementary pairing.
That's one of the things that Jacqueline Kennedy remarked in a letter after her death, that once you met her, you were changed.
Yes, she left that kind of lasting impression. I think she was one of those people, when you were in Ruth's presence, you were the focus of her attention. And that is a remarkable gift for people who have that, because you feel important and you feel that you're embraced by them in a way. And I get the sense that that was the impression she left on people, that you were the focus of her attention at that point in time, and she was very gracious and she was doing everything she could to help people feel welcome, especially here at Winterthur. Winterthur could be an intimidating place for some of the people who came and stayed here. And so we have wonderful references of things that she would do to help people feel welcome, to laugh off, little social foibles that somebody else might commit and be embarrassed about if she didn't just make light of the whole thing. So I think that was an integral part of her personality.
Now we're going to talk a little bit about her family life and her marriage when we come back. We'll be right back.
Hi, my name is Rich Fisher at Squeezebox Records, and if you're not watching 302 TV, you're missing it.
Welcome back. We're talking about the exhibit Lady of the House at Winterthur. Now, Deborah, when you walk into this gorgeous exhibit, congratulations by the way, one of the first things that catches your eye is the beautiful wedding dress. It's not the actual wedding dress, but it's a replica, right?
It is a replica of her wedding dress. Her wedding dress is lost to time. We don't know what happened to it after she married. To our knowledge, it was not passed on to her daughters. At any rate, they did not imply that to us. So we don't know what happened to her dress, but it is quite lovely and just filmy and gorgeous and flowing. And she wore her grandmother's lace veil. And an interesting dress because it was a white dress, but it had an underlay of silver. So it had a shimmer to it that people commented on the beautiful lace and the silver in her wedding gown.
It's really gorgeous. And the double tier, you have the lace and then you have, I don't even know what the fabric would be called, like a chiffon.
A chiffon or a tulle over it, I would think.
Really, really beautiful. So the wedding must have been absolutely grand. I know you have some of the invitations and
Yes.
things like that. What was the wedding like?
The wedding was at the church in Hyde Park, New York, and it was written up in many newspapers of the day. This was a society wedding, and it was commented that Ruth was getting quite a catch, that H.F. DuPont was one of the long sought-after bachelors in the social circuit. So it was a formal wedding that was held there. Members of society, of course, coming, spectacular gifts that were given. And then there was a reception back at her parents' property in Hyde Park is where the reception was held. So it was a formal gathering and I think a very lavish and the kind of thing that makes the society pages.
So it was a fairy tale wedding, but the marriage got off to a little bit of a rocky start because when she came here,
Right.
things didn't gel too well, right?
She had an idyllic 3 months on her honeymoon. She and HF took a 3-month honeymoon. My honeymoon was 3 days, oh well, but took a 3-month honeymoon across Canada by rail and then spent some time in California and then came back across the country. So that was fabulous. She saw many sights and many hotels and wonderful things that she writes about, but then she got to Winterthur. And Winterthur at that time was not the Winterthur that you see now. It was smaller. It was H.F. DuPont's father's house. It was only 50 rooms. And he was still present. He was in his 70s, and he was a career military man, so he was brought up to give orders and to expect them to be followed. And after he was done in the Army, he served during the Civil War, he won the Medal of Honor, he went into business, and then he went into politics, and he was a senator from Delaware, so all positions of great authority. So Ruth comes in expecting to be the lady of the house. Well, there hadn't been a lady of the house since H.F. DuPont's mother, Pauline Foster DuPont, had died in 1902. So it had really been Henry Algernon who was running the show, and he was reluctant to relinquish any of his authority. He expected things to be done his way. And being older, he was also starting in failing health. So she was very much a caretaker for someone who I get the sense was not treating her with a great deal of respect, and that's a very difficult position to be in. So I think her first years at Winterthur, while the Colonel was still here, were very, very challenging for her, and they did color her impressions of Winterthur in a way that lasted for the rest of her life. She thought Winterthur was beautiful, she thought the collections were magnificent, the garden was magnificent, but she never truly felt at home here. And so HF actually built a house for her out at Southampton, Long Island, where she had summered as a girl and where he had been in summers. And he built that house for her, and I think that was always her home, more so than Winterthur was.
You talk a little bit about the different homes that they have and when they would go and everything. And the one question that, crossed my mind when I was reading about, being married to such an avid furniture and decorative arts collector, did she have a say in the decoration of the house at all, or was it just his gig?
It was his gig. The most say that I can think of that she had in the decor was occasionally she would work with some of his preferred dealers to buy him an antique as a Christmas gift. And then she writes about, oh, he loved, the punch bowl or whatever it was that I got for him, but she would not have done that on her own. She worked with one of his dealers to secure something that she knew would appeal to him. But she felt so out of his league in terms of the aspects of decor and design. And their roles were very segregated, and that was not unusual for men and women at that time, that the men were involved in the business, and Winterthur was very much H.F. DuPont's, in some ways, his primary business. He made this place his career. And so that was his, and her role was managing all the female servants, which was typical for someone in her role. He would have had oversight of the male servants, and she had oversight of the female staff. So she managed all the female staff. She had primary responsibility for the children. She helped him plan entertainments. She was known for bringing together congenial groups of people. But in terms of who created Winterthur, that was H.F. DuPont.
Now, you mentioned the kids. Whenever you walk in, one of the most stunning pieces, aside from the wedding dress, is that portrait of Ruth and Pauline.
Yes, that's a beautiful portrait done in 1922. Pauline Louise was their eldest daughter. She was born in 1918, and so she's 3 or 4 at the time that painting was done. Absolutely gorgeous painting done by Harrington Mann. Harrington Mann was a Scots portrait painter, a society painter, who came many times to the U.S. to paint many portraits of DuPont family members. You'll find them in other DuPont households, but other people from society. An interesting sidebar is one of his ventures to the U.S. to do some painting was on a ship called the Titanic. And when the ship went down, the newspapers reported that his wife had been saved and he had been lost. But of course, that painting was done over 10 years later. He had survived, and it was just the confusion of the time. So he painted that portrait of Ruth and Pauline Louise, and he was known in particular for doing just charming images of children. And that is a beautiful painting of her and a beautiful painting of her daughter. She's wearing a magnificent string of pearls that H.F. DuPont had given to her. It was one of her prized possessions that he had given her. It's a gorgeous painting.
It certainly is. And we're going to talk about travel when we get back.
Hi, I'm Paula Phipps, and I love having the 302 here at beautiful Nemours Estate.
Welcome back. We're talking about Lady of the House at Winterthur. Now, Deborah, if you go into the last phase of the exhibit, you talk a lot about travel, and the thing that caught my eye was the travel case. It's kind of like a Swiss Army knife for a lady. There's so much in there. Talk about this.
It is an amazing case that is filled with everything she could need for her personal dress and care. Bottles with gold-plated tops on them that would hold makeup and medications if needed, and then there's curling irons and combs and tools, everything you would have. Most of us have, a little travel case that has the little necessities in it, and her travel case is massive. But it is a gorgeous thing to see. It opens up in sections, so you can dig down into it and get all of these wonderful little treasures out of it. Combs and pens and anything she could need.
And a curling iron.
Curling irons, anything she needed for her personal care.
It's amazing that it's so well preserved when you consider that how long ago it was used, and it was taken all over the world.
It was. They went on several trips abroad. I mentioned their honeymoon that had been across the country, but they took an around the world cruise in 1936 with their 2 daughters. The girls were teenagers at that time, and this was the celebration of their 20th wedding anniversary. So they went on an around the world cruise then, and then after World War II, they were also frequently traveling abroad, and they were well known in elite houses in England. She had invitations from royalty. They had been in the presence of the Queen on at least one occasion. So she had a fabulous life, and it's wonderful when she writes about that around the world trip, the writing again, constantly writing letters. And she kept a whole travel journal about that around the world trip. And she writes about that she has seen so many wonderful things that she could not have imagined, that she's just too excited even to sleep. It has just captured her mind, so everything that she's seeing on this trip.
Now, she and HF were frequent visitors to the White House over the years, right?
They were. She, of course, had early Washington, D.C. connections, as did HF DuPont. But the real focus we think of for their connections to the White House started in 1961 when Jacqueline Kennedy first came to Winterthur, and she asked Henry Francis DuPont to head the White House Fine Arts Committee, which was going to restore the White House. And she wanted to acquire fabulous examples of American decorative arts to furnish the public rooms at the White House. And so HF owned the premier collection of American decorative arts. He knew all the dealers, he knew all the collectors, he knew how to move in that circuit. And so she tapped him to head the White House Fine Arts Committee to refurnish the White House, and then that led to invitations to the White House during Jacqueline Kennedy's time. And we also have correspondence and invitations during the presidency of Johnson as well, so that he continued in that advisory role through the 60s.
We were talking about the letters, and I know that their daughter Ruth wrote a book about HF.
Yes.
But she was in the process of writing a book about her mother.
She was.
You've seen the manuscript.
Parts of it, yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about the relationship that she had with her girls?
Oh, it's interesting. You know, mothers and daughters, when you read the letters, they are funny. I mentioned, you know, Ruth writing about having to pull her daughter out for orthodontia, but she writes to her daughter off at school and says, you know, we've not heard from you. It would be nice if you write to us before the millennium comes. You know, that little touch of, why haven't we heard from you, kid? But also talking about her social engagements, things that she's doing, things that her daughter is doing, when they're coming down to visit her at school, where they'll be over the holidays, what the plans are. And so it sounds very lively and fun. The impression that we have from having met Ruth DuPont Lord was that in person it was a little bit more back and forth between the two of them, more so than you get the sense in the letters. And I think her writing of her book was her way, first of understanding her father, and then of coming to better understand her mother through her own eyes as a mature woman who had since raised children and lived her own life, and coming back and looking at her mother's life and what she could glean for her own life from what her mother had experienced.
Yeah, I think that, what is it, 2020?
2020 hindsight.
Yeah,
there
yeah,
you go.
You
Perfect
can kind of
for this
understand, you know, what it's like to have a child and deal with all of the things as a mother, you know. So it really is telling whenever you come here and you see the exhibit, you really get a full picture of who this woman was. And a lot of times people, they don't realize that there was a lady of the house.
Absolutely. They often ask about her because they ask the same questions you ask. Was there a Mrs. DuPont? Did she have anything to do with decorating this place? What was her role? And so that was an impetus for this exhibition in this year that was intended to celebrate women. I think the year got rather sidetracked, but a year to celebrate women and a great opportunity for us to bring forth this story, which provides so many touchstones to other people and aspects of life in that time period seen through Ruth's eyes.
I just have one last question. Why did she call Winterthur Frog Hollow?
There are a lot of frogs here. You need to come here in the spring, just as the garden is coming into bloom, and particularly down here in this garden area, and there is just a frog chorus constantly. Frogs in the pool, tree frogs, and it's a symphony. And actually it's a great time for people to come. Not only is the garden spectacular, but children love to come here and just hunt down all the frogs because they're still here. And so that was she had nicknames for everyone and everything. And that was just one of her nicknames for Winterthur, was Frog Hollow.
Alrighty, Deborah, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And we'll be right back. For more information on Lady of the House or any of the fantastic exhibits here at Winterthur, you can visit winterthur.org. That'll do it for this week's episode. We leave you now with some beauty shots of Winterthur. Until next time, I'm Jackie Ferris. We'll see you on the 302.